YOLO composing gloves here, and this is a map of sound.
But right now, it's empty.
Sound can be broken into two general categories: music and art, and science. There are three components that make up all of sound. The first is a sum of frequencies. This is more than just a sound being high or low. It's why a clarinet sounds like a clarinet and a tuba sounds like a tuba, even when they play the same note. They have different timbres, a different sum of frequencies. The second is amplitude, because science is specific about loudness. And the third is phase, which is the point when a particular frequency starts, or the point when a particular wave starts. So it's actually a sum of frequencies. This is great and all, but have you ever heard someone describe sound like this? I didn't think so. So we have the 8 aspects of sound. Basically adjectives that also describe every sound ever. We've got tonal sound, sound that has a tone or a pitch. Think of flutes, or even just hitting a metal pole. The ringing afterwards is a tonal sound. And we also have atonal sound, sounds that don't have a pitch, such as noise, or even just like a car door opening, things that you can't really say what note that is. We also have soft sounds, loud sounds, short sounds, long sounds, sounds with high flux, which is there's a lot of change happening during the sound, and sounds with low flux, not very much change is happening during the sound. Something like a flute or that metal pole ringing is pretty static, so there's not very much flux, whereas a lot of bass sound design has a very high amount of flux in the sound. Each one of these has no real exact definition, and this is exactly why it can describe all sound. Each one has entire sets of adjectives just to describe these adjectives. These are just a base set to work with. Finally, there are 5 components of music. I've heard some people list 2 or 3, but never all 5. Quick, pause the video and think of what they could be. Comment them below, and if you get it right, you should listen to every fugue Bach ever wrote. Time's up. They are in no particular order. Number 1, structure. How a song is put together. Some songs have what seems like no structure, while others are so structured that they literally use math to create their song. Number 2, theme. This is where melody is, but melody alone is not enough. This is anything that pulls your attention to it as an idea of the piece. Number 3 is sounds. How else are you gonna make sound without sounds? The sounds you pick determine things like location, are you on a beach or in a forest, and they also help determine emotion, are you happy or sad? Rhythm. Sound takes place over time, and rhythm is the word for this. A small change in the rate or just in the way you treat time greatly changes the rhythm and the feel of the sound. And finally, number 5 is harmony. The notes you pick and how they are used. Think of chords. Every song, track, piece, beat, composition, whatever you call your thing, can be completely described with these 5 components. Some may have a lot of one component and a lot less of another, but I guarantee you it can be completely described with these 5 components. So when we use these 5 components to look at and analyze a song, I call it structural analysis.
Wow.
But that name's already taken by music theory, so to differentiate it, I also call it Burgessian analysis, because I came up with it.
Yes.
But that's not all. There's this new hip way to look at music called music theory. All the kids are into it. The revolutionary new process takes notes, rhythms, and sounds and turns them into math. But in music, magic. You have fundamentals like chords and scales, which lead to part writing, the study of what part gets what note and why. In this part of theory, parallel fifths and octaves are forbidden, giving rise to functional harmony, which gives chords a function or a job. Nothing like a first trip on drugs, or so I'm told, and the people in functional harmony love their tonic, which is the first note in chord in a scale. They always wind up on it from the gateway chord. It really dominates their life and has a tone that really leads them on. Obviously, once you've taken all that tonic, you become non-functional harmony. We're not really sure where the one chord is anymore, and so no more tonic for you. Sorry. We start to go a little crazy and end up recovering, but you have a couple of relapses, landing you in modal harmony. It's like tonal harmony, but with modes, which are basically messed up major and minor scales. Church people really like 8 of these. After this whole mess, you're over all this tonal crap and move into the post-tonal part of your life, where you do things like write notation that looks nothing like regular notation and develop a love for sound, like big, huge walls of sound. You also want to stick it to the man, so you put parallel intervals all over your music. Take that, tonal harmony, and all your rules. You're also getting pretty old, and you begin to wonder, what the crap is with only 12 notes? You start using the notes between notes, and while you're into this noteception, you find your friend, the fretless bass player. Suddenly you realize he wasn't playing out of tune his whole life. No, instead he was playing mega advanced microtonal music. At this point, you have a life crisis and wind up a minimalist, playing the same chord over and 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 over, and then bam, the same chord, but in a new inversion, and then maybe a new chord like maybe 5 minutes later. By this time, you have gone insane, and you turn into a serial theorist. Buy one box of 12 tone and get the next one at twice the price. And we all know the joy of musical analysis. There's also the field of counterpoint, which is all about melody, multiple meters, multiple melodies at the same time. There's even different species. Well, now you know why music theory people have issues. It's quite a vicious life cycle. Performers don't need to get this far into music theory, so they don't get as crazy. Well, they get a different kind of crazy. But they study the art of making sound their whole life, so they get a spot on the map. Many of them are excellent composers and theorists and musicologists and all other sorts of things. If you want to get a degree in music performance, you have to pass a jury, where you play by yourself for a bunch of other crazy good musicians, and it's not stressful at all. I guess we could put DJs on here just to be PC. A lot of musicians want to play what they have heard others play. This is called plagiarism. Oral dictation. It's called oral dictation. Basically, you can write down whatever you hear in the language of music, and you can look at music and know how it's going to sound. It's basically like how you can look at food and know if you'd like it or if you might like it and how it's probably going to taste. Solfege is the system we use for writing things down and learning this process. It's a system for the naming of intervals between notes. It's kind of like the alphabet, but for notes. But we already have letters for the notes, so it's kind of confusing. It's one of those things that when you learn it, it makes sense. But until then, just don't think about it too much. The people who are best at this are usually composers, the masters of theory and oral dictation. It makes them superior in creating a huge variety of moods. They write their music on what's called a score, where they keep track of all those counterpoints. Many of them also double as sound engineers, as knowledge of theory alone is not enough to make a polished track. There's another branch, a secret Illuminati of music called musicology, which is the branch of music history. These people study how sound has been used in art through the ages, such as the Baroque, Classical, and Romantic eras. It sounds safe, it sounds normal at first, but that's what they want you to think. Naturally, this actually smells like a secret organization, especially because this degree often comes with hefty sides of culture, philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. Sound for picture is a huge field today, and is much more than just music. It's the area of sound effects. The whooshes, bashes, and even the wind are all replaced after the footage is shot. Any sound a human makes that isn't vocal is considered Foley. Because some guy named Foley thought of this thing, and now we all just call it Foley. Things like the click of a pen, clothing rustling, and even footsteps, every single footstep, #personal experience, are all put in after the shooting, or after the filming, that is. Because, shootings would be a bad thing. They have whole studios just for Foley, with tons of pits called Foley pits, and tons of actors called Foley walkers, kind of like a zombie thing. Oh, in the Foley pits, have the surface they are trying to replicate, like some grass or dirt. The actor will get in the pit and act out the scene again, only now with ideal audio conditions. This is typically how we do footsteps. ADR, automated dialogue replacement, also called dubbing, is the replacement of the voice, as it's often crap on the original set recording, so the entire thing is redone. Everything. Even the people in the background scenes at the cafe are all replaced. It's pretty fun to put together. Also, some of the most complex mixing goes on in this field. Mixing is the art of getting sounds to fit together. In sound for picture, there are hundreds and hundreds of tracks, each track having many sounds on them. The music people will mix theirs, the sound effects people will mix theirs, and the Foley people will mix theirs, and the dialogue people will mix theirs. And they will hand it to another guy who then mixes those mixes together. Mixception. In the audio program I went through, we had a guy come in who did the sound for Dino Trucks. And so Dino Trucks is a kids television show. You wouldn't think it's all that crazy. But he had actually already removed several hundred tracks from the session. So he's downsizing his session to bring it to our studio. Now our studio is a professional studio. It is rented out at $100 an hour, and people like Disney come down to use it all the time. And this studio could still barely handle the massive project. And this is when most of the tracks are muted. It blew my mind how crazy this was. And these screens, the number of things on the screens is unlike anything I've ever seen. There's no YouTube project FLP file session I've ever seen that ever compares with anything that has to do with television shows or movies. It's simply incredible how much is on the screen. And that's the organized view. I can't even imagine it being disorganized. It would be completely impossible to work with. So just putting it out there for props to the people who do this kind of mixing. They also have this special extra channel called the low frequency effects channel that's responsible for the low boom you hear in theaters. So that's pretty dank. This brings us to the good old audio engineers who are, yes, on the art side. Many of them will actually defend that it's an art, but the main reason is that the vast majority of so-called audio engineers know hardly any math or science past basic high school levels. They definitely can't fix their own gear a good 95% of the time. Some of them, there's more legit ones, but the great majority of them are not very good at actual engineering. It really should be called something else because they are intimately familiar with gear. They can run gear and have it translate into an art form. So that's why they're on the art side. In this area, we have things like mixing, which often involve balancing the areas of the spectrum so the project sounds full and fits for its intended purpose, using tools like EQ, delay, chorusing, flangers, phasers, compression, even the multiband kind, as well as distortion, taking wimpy soft sounds and making them punchy, full, and clear. There is no end to the adjectives in this field, such as but not limited to crisp, clean, high, squelchy, muddy, low, dank, grizzly, etc., etc., etc. You know you're an audio engineer when you think adjectives have some sort of specific universal meaning, especially when you're talking to an artist and your artist asks you to make their track sound like Mars had an affair with Pluto and now the Earth is pissed off. I've had artists ask me to make their track purple. That's sort of like the running joke in the industry. Or blue. The colors are a popular thing. Dreamlike. Just artists will ask you to do weird things. But audio engineers have their own set of adjectives. I kid you not. Google what it means for the areas of a spectrum in an EQ, and you will literally see charts with adjectives on them. It's kind of funny. So anyways, you'll also find things ending up here that you wouldn't expect. Early methods of voice encoding became vocoding. Think Daft Punk. Early methods of finding oil actually started up what became auto-tune. Once your stuff sounds good, we need to put a final polish on it. Generally, it's looked at as making a song as loud as possible, but still sounding as great as possible. The truth is, though, the people who are genuinely great at mastering aim for a mood. It's a much more artistic endeavor than it is just squeezing the last little bit of sound out of a track. This is also why the loudness wars are a thing. Critical listening also falls here. This is very different than oral dictation. Here we care solely about what is affecting our signal. We don't care about pitch or being able to write things down. We care about being able to pinpoint problems in the sound itself. We look at how our song is affected by certain sounds and the frequency balance of our song. Instead of being asked which note, you're asked what frequency. on the first day of my first audio class, among the first words of my first audio teacher, he said, "First class, we must talk about signal flow." And then for like the whole next year, that was literally all we talked about. For an audio engineer, sound is acoustic. And we capture it with a microphone, kind of like capturing Pokemon. The mic picks up vibrations in the air, and that's the sound. That gets turned into electricity, which is the signal. It's not sound anymore, it's signal. And as the signal moves through our chain of gear, we care a ton about what is happening, because that signal is going to be our song. So signal flow is everything. Plus, if you don't get your signal flow right, you don't get any sound at all, which is a whole nother issue. The real black magic of audio engineering is the miking. Where do you put the mics? Which mics do you use? Do we use the stereo mic techniques like XY, or do you just want to put one mic up? At what angle do we put all these mics at? And what does this mean for our music and our signal flow? Will the performer be able to be relaxed and actually get a good performance with a mic shoved in her face like that? The answers to these questions are the real secrets of miking, with the most important rule of all being the good rule. Get a good performance, because if your performance is crap, then your song is going to sound like crap. And even if you polish it up with mixing, you're just polishing crap, which is still crap. So you want to make sure that you've got things being good. There's other rules in there too, like the 5-to-1 rule and several other things. And we use like computers and stuff. But basically audio engineering, black magic, miking, mixing, all that stuff. You meet the guy who knows secrets and away you go. If you're dank, you get into synthesis and sound design. Instead of making recordings of other people's sounds, you generate your own sounds with math. Do you know any math? No? Well, you can use other people's math, because that's pretty much kind of the same thing. We'll just call that synthesis and sound design. You have things like FM, AM, and RM. And you could probably add another thing with an M, and it would probably also be a synthesis technique. FM, frequency modulation, is when one frequency controls another. It's one of those things a lot of people don't understand, but it's very popular in dubstep because it just sounds cool. AM is when the amplitude of one frequency controls another. So that's actually called amplitude modulation. This is where these M's come from. And RM is ring modulation. It's sort of the same thing as AM modulation. It's just under some special conditions. You also have stuff like wavetable synthesis, which takes a bunch of bass sounds, that's the wave part, the sound part, the waves, squishes them together into a table, which it's really a table of data, but I picture like a physical table, and then all your friends get together at this table and you have a conversation in sounds, and that's how you get your sounds. You can look up a synth called Serum, and you can actually see the wavetable visually in a really great way. But there's lots of other synths that use wavetable synthesis. Additive synthesis is when you take a bunch of sine waves and just generate them together in a way that makes them all come together in unity and form one big sound. Granular synthesis takes the data that represents sound over time and peels it apart to make whole new sounds. Subtractive synthesis takes big sounds and filters and removes things to make new sounds. It's also usually combined with elements of additive synthesis, so there's like this adding and taking away via filters and sound sources. Some synths start with a recording, also known as a sample, which is basically just a tiny recording. But the synthesizers will feature unusual ways to break the sound down and reuse it. It very rarely sounds like the actual original sample. Most synthesizers use several of these things all at once, and even include things changing over time to make more dynamic sounds. I also want to mention 3D audio here, as it's been getting a lot of steam with the demand of virtual reality going way up. You'll see things like HRTF, which stands for Head Related Transfer Function. And it's something that describes how sound literally bends around your head. Pretty important for creating a realistic experience. We also have a little area for those folks who claim to play drums. They claim to play piano. They claim to play guitar. They claim they can sing. But if you ask them to sing, you'd realize they're about as good as a third grader. You people can stay right over here in this part of the map and come out when you're ready to take things seriously, or just stop lying. Now, onto the science. Most people will think right off the bat of acoustics. Acoustics is the study of how sound pressure waves act in a room. You will see all sorts of rooms presented and be asked, where in the room do certain frequencies disappear and which ones are they? Also known as nodes, which are caused by things called standing waves. And no, they're not waves that can stand up. You'll make instruments and even design buildings that are meant to sound a certain way. You'll also learn that the unit we use to measure loudness, the dB or decibel, also has like a million different versions, not strictly for acoustics, they're for other things, but there's so many of them. A very related area is psychoacoustics. This deals with how your brain interprets the sound once it goes through your ear, which I decided to include here as well. So in this area, you've got your ear doctors, along with advances in hearing aids and other sound health related topics. The way sound interacts with the brain is pretty insane. You have an area to detect pitch, but a different area for frequency, and yet another area to determine if what you heard was funny or sad, and another area for rhythm. Let alone the differences in your ability to process language and know that it's not music. There's actually separate areas for processing language over music. It's a dense subject and lots of weird and cool studies have been done on it. I list here 2 books that I think are must-reads even if you're not into neuroscience. If this interests you at all, you should totally check it out. They're written for the common person to be able to understand. The first one is by Oliver Sacks. They're both neuroscientists. Oliver Sacks' Musicophilia. Check that one out. And also Daniel J. Levitian, Your Brain on Music. This one, a lot of people have already read or know about. So if you've read it, go ahead, post in the comments what you thought of it. In the area of psychoacoustics, you'll also learn about a number of interesting phenomena, like why when a car drives by, the pitch goes down. This is known as the Doppler effect, or how a sound can be made to sound wider by putting a very small delay on it, called a Haas effect. There are many other effects like this. You also run across Fletcher and Munson, who famously showed that humans do not hear all the frequencies the same, let alone do even 2 humans hear the same frequencies the same. We're all different. Moving on up, we branch out into the much more mathematical side of sound. DSP, or digital signal processing, is the math of filters, signal synthesis, and much more. Anything that is digital uses DSP to some extent, including your phones, the internet, literally anything that's pretty much electronic is gonna have DSP. If it has picture processing, audio processing capabilities, it's got DSP in it. Fourier transforms is the math of breaking a signal into a sum of infinite waves of various pitch, phase, and frequencies, which is at the heart of many signal processing units. They break stuff down, process the pieces, and then put it back together. This allows for things like signal restoration, such as noise removal. You'll find a ton of complex math, like the subject of complex math. I'm not talking about math that's actually complex, though it is kind of difficult math. And you'll also find a lot of statistics in this field. Programs such as Reactor or Max MSP try to simplify the process with a visual layout of what component is going into what other component and what exactly is happening. Generally, DSP is used over the analog counterpart for its superior flexibility, but analog is still alive and kicking. And a lot of people swear by analog for the sound you get out of it. It's still a very popular thing. And it's also got its own uses and applications still. I mean, it's not completely out of a job, but we do use DSP significantly more these days. All the laws of digital audio also exist in this category as well. Broadcasting is also to be included in this field, and it sends sound to the far-reaching places of the planet. You've also got the world of developers who seek to make gear and programs that let us, less technical folk, make the art we love, or just do our job. Everything from digital audio workstations to new formats for plugins, Steinberg, to notation editing programs to DSP programs and so on are in this mix. This is a very large industry. Most of the stuff here is done in C++. It's almost daunting how many possibilities there are in this field. That's why it's so big. You'll also find people like the folks at Juice, spelled J-U-C-E, who are basically developers for developers. Developerception. They make frameworks for other programmers to use. You'll also find the more technical sound engineers who actually deserve the term engineer in their title, working as programmers or really sophisticated sound designers, usually developing either plugins or sample libraries to be used in the next movies. The sample libraries that are produced range from a collection of specifically recorded sounds, such as kick sounds and hi-hats and drums, or field recordings. These are known as sample packs, and some of the more famous ones are known as Vengeance samples. Those are very famous, all the way to Contact 5's legendary engine that allows companies like Spitfire Audio produce truly lifelike instruments, combining programming with digital audio workstations with incredible recording techniques. We can't forget the gear either. Instruments are generally in the acoustic domain, but some instruments actually don't make noise on their own. MIDI is a musical instrument digital interface and was originally a big deal because it let you control one synth with another. The instrument interface can be literally anything that sends a MIDI signal. A MIDI signal is a signal that tells a sound source how to make sound. The most common MIDI controller is a keyboard controller. However, I've seen drum pads, I've seen weird sphere things that you kind of massage, and how you massage it changes the MIDI, which changes the sound source. I've also seen guitars, and MIDI itself doesn't make sound. It sends instructions on how to make sound. Sometimes instruments also double as MIDI interfaces, such as there's bass guitars out there that work like this. So they also double as an instrument, but a pure MIDI interface will have no sound component. It only sends signal on how to make a sound. We can't forget how we get our signal in and out of things and how we convert it into a digital signal. That's right, USB audio interfaces and all other kinds of signal processing gear. Designing and perfecting this gear requires a tremendous amount of knowledge in many fields, and it shows in the price tags. Everything from the encoding of signals to computer networks to just making a simple guitar amp is in this area. So there you have it, a map of sound, or all the main subjects of sound anyways. If I missed a subject, go ahead and leave a comment. I don't claim for this to be the end-all be-all when it comes to a map of sound, but it's certainly my attempt at it. This is a very brief overview just to let you know what is out there. Many of these subjects can be entire maps on their own. In fact, most of these subjects can be entire maps on their own. Check out the rest of my channel where I post lots of educational material, everything from learning synthesis to learning music theory to learning mixing and so on. #YOLO, subscribe, and have a blessed day.